A couple months ago, a company formerly called Facebook, screw that, everyone including myself will still call them Facebook, changed their name and product line to Meta. The responses could generally be boiled down to, this is really dumb, I can't believe we're actually living in a cyberpunk dystopia, and a couple tech enthusiasts who thought that this was the future. For anyone out of the loop, by the way, what this entailed was that Facebook is trying to build an entire virtual reality world, or basically social media 2.0. However, Meta only more deeply hammered in a prediction I have been making and thinking about for a long time. Meta might appear kinda dumb, but I think it's catastrophic. Not for society as a whole, but for Facebook and the entire industry that it stands in. Social media is a huge part of everyone's life, whether we like it or not, and the internet's crawling with people who want to take your information, including Facebook. To keep yourself and your information safe, use PIA VPN. PIA VPN has over 30 million downloads and encrypted internet tunnels that keep your browser data from your internet service provider, cybercriminals, government censors, ensuring your information is safe from any prying eyes. PIA VPN is the most transparent VPN in the market, and they never store or record your data, meaning what you do online is just between yourself and your screen. Being a YouTuber means I basically have all my life's work online, and I'm not going to go back to school anytime soon, and that's a lot of information that needs to be kept safe. And PIA VPN provides that safety for me. This is a quality product that provides real safety. PIA goes above and beyond to protect your information like no other, and one of my favorite things at this VPN is that it works with all major streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime, so you can access all your favorite content anywhere in the world. PIA goes above and beyond to protect your information like no other, and for my fans only, they're offering to let you use PIA VPN for $1.98 a month, plus an additional 4 months for free. That's 83% off for anyone who uses the link in the description. So don't wait, get PIA VPN to protect your information for the safest possible browsing experience. Human organizations, whether nations, corporations, or musical bands, tend to rise and fall with similar factors and driving forces. I'm going to explain these to show how Facebook will collapse. Groups largely form around shared missions. In the case of musical groups, it's a certain genre, let's say power metal. With nations, it's a certain geographic region, ethnic group, religious identity, and administrative structure. And with corporations, it's a certain niche in the economy, with Facebook's example being generally vanilla social media. The vast majority of any new kind of endeavor fails. Most bands never make it past basements in their hometown, most countries in history are tiny tribal confederacies or feuding warlords, and the vast majority of startups fail. For a group to succeed, it needs to provide some sort of service in a way better than its competitors enough to survive. For example, with the nation of Germany keeping that geographic region functioning, or with K-pop bands getting giant hordes of screaming teenage girl fans. A dirty secret of history is that most nations only very rarely change their underlying structure. France has been a country inhabited by Catholic French speakers and run by the centralized government in league with bureaucrats since the 12th century. One of the most interesting parts of Russian history is how you can see the Tsarist government inherit so many government institutions from the Mongols, and the communists afterwards had a large amount of continuity with the Tsars in turn. I mean, this is a whole video I made about how China's underlying governmental structure has remained constant since before the birth of Christ. And I mean, yeah, you do see some big changes, like America's abolition of slavery and the gradual growth of the federal government, but once you remove more than one pillar from a nation, for example, religion, ethnicity, or administrative structure, you end up with a country changing its identity. For example, how Rome became Byzantium or the Aztecs became Mexicans. This YouTube channel is able to prosper and grow from the switch from alternate history to politics and philosophy, since it's largely the same group of people who are fans of both, and requires the same skill set on my part. However, if I had changed to historic cooking, it would have totally killed the channel. So for the tech bros here who are feeling cheated by being dragged onto a history channel and are asking how this relates to Facebook, this is since there are shared patterns for how organizations collapse, and Facebook is showing all the red flags. I'll give 2 examples and then apply them to Facebook, that of Tsarist Russia and a generic indie pop band. Tsarist Russia was one of the most successful states in history. By the early 20th century, it was the largest land-based empire in the world, with a massive population, military, and fast economic growth, alongside lots of cultural production. Every nation within 1,000 miles of its borders was terrified of it. However, Tsarist Russia was running into problems since the world it was designed for was rapidly going away. Keeping a majority of their population in cruel serfdom really didn't lend itself well to the construction of a modern industrial society. Meanwhile, theocratic, authoritarian, absolutist monarchies weren't really a popular kind of government anymore. Russia was falling behind in military technology as the rate of technological progress increased, and backwards Russia really couldn't keep up. In its last 50 or so years, Tsarist Russia tried a series of reforms in order to close the gap, whether abolishing serfdom, modernizing the military, installing a parliament, and the like. But as they continued, the framework of elite unity that held the society in the first place stopped working, which meant Tsarist Russia collapsed, to be replaced by a communist regime that killed tens of millions of people and drove Russia into the ground as a society. Now, I'm going to make a hard pivot that might not make sense, but this is an indie pop band that I made up, but it's a trajectory that happens to a lot of real bands, not just in indie pop, but across a bunch of genres. There's this band called Fly on the Wall. They formed in 2009 in New York City. They're known for making quirky, emotional music with deep lyrics that your girlfriend listens to or you occasionally hear in a bookstore or coffee shop. They carve out a respectable place in their genre and have a fan base that really likes them. At this point, they start to cross over to the mainstream. The band members are really excited that they're seeing mainstream success and so start to add more pop elements into their music to make it more acceptable to the mainstream, which means they get 2 big radio hits. However, once they become pop, they lose a lot of their old fans that actually had a lot of loyalty to them, and although the radio hits make good money, no one in the mainstream are really loyal fans and leave them quickly. Similarly, the shift in genre was controversial and caused a rift among the band members. With the shocking collapse in sales after their big radio hit, the band breaks up. Okay, so how does this relate to Facebook? Facebook was able to become successful by being the most vanilla of social media. It doesn't do pictures as well as Instagram or spread thoughts as well as Twitter. That wasn't intentional, but was because Facebook was a pioneer, and so those other companies were built around attributes Facebook hadn't totally teased out when it was formed. However, as the industry moved along, it meant that Facebook lost its edge. This meant it lost its advantage to a lot of other social media companies that started to eat up its support base. The thing is that Facebook has become one of the largest companies ever and has a lot of entrenched interests that effectively demand growth in order to maintain their survival. Like Fly on the Wall in Tsarist Russia, Facebook is outside its comfort zone and operating in a range different from what it was originally designed to. For all these groups, in order to survive, they have to make changes, but since they've gotten so big, they have to appeal to a lot of different factions when they make changes, whether the general pop-listening radio public or the elite factions of Tsarist Russia. All of this hampers reasonable decision-making. However, as the world changes, Facebook can't return to the appeal they once had when they started. In order to unify all the various factions that make up a large organization such as Facebook, the leader needs a big project to create a symbol to get behind, which, lo and behold, is Meta. However, as said before, trying to totally restart a business model is playing with a majority death chance of Russian roulette. At the same time, with legendarily powerful organizations like Facebook or Tsarist Russia, alongside a successful band like Fly on the Wall, setbacks that for other organizations might appear reasonable look like attacks against their impregnability and herald decays and collapses. At this point, I've developed a logic for why I think Facebook could collapse, but to dive deeper, we need to see how the tech ecosystem today is built in such a way as to precipitate a future collapse. I'm kind of in a partnership with the tech industry in that What If Altist has a cult following in Silicon Valley, and so a lot of my best friends are tech CEOs, and they in turn intro me to their social circles, which also means I work with the tech industry in my consulting side hustle. Email me for job offers. But all in all, I probably know somewhere in the range of 40 tech CEOs, and I have a pretty good pulse on whatever's going on in the industry at any given time. And there's honestly a lot to admire in that industry. It sucks up a lot of the top talent in our society and is a very disproportionate amount of the most intelligent, charismatic, and capable people in the world. And I mean, we've all seen the positive effects this kind of person has brought into the world, whether through allowing this YouTube channel to exist at all, speedy Amazon deliveries of the latest popular whatever, or Ubering out of a dangerous neighborhood late at night when you would otherwise never be able to get a taxi. However, as organizations become older and more bloated, the negative traits start to outweigh the positive, and I can see that with tech already. One of which being that in tech today, and this is driven in a lot of ways by the ridiculous amount of money that there is in the world economy right now, is that Silicon Valley has a tendency to support ridiculous ideas that sound cool but have no applicability. I mean, just look at Tesla, which is a higher valuation than the next 5 largest car companies put together, but barely makes any cars. Or alternatively, the electric car company Rivian, which has such a high valuation that it's effectively $50 million for each car they actually put out. When you see an idea like Meta and think it's really dumb and kinda dystopian, you have to realize that the powerful people in tech are inhabiting a cultural bubble far different from the rest of America, and even more so the rest of the world. In this cultural bubble, technology can solve any problem and its potential is limitless. Crazy off-the-wall ideas are praised while practicality is just often ignored. Everyone has seen a couple of their friends in their network become obscenely wealthy, off an idea that looked kinda sus, so reality filters are often thrown out the window. It often reminds me of how in old Asian empires, that by the time any news would reach the emperor, it would be so warped that real policies couldn't get done. I mean, I don't even have to bring up San Francisco's bizarre leftism, which makes theft okay and has turned one of the wealthiest cities in the world into a hellscape of heroin and homelessness. The best examples of these tendencies are in crypto, which is really the popular pony to ride right now. One of my friends in the industry said back 10 years ago you made a tech company and you hope to get $30 million, and now you just make a coin and make $300 million in a matter of months. People make crypto and NFT versions of everything. I mean, I've personally gotten 3 offers to make Woodafaltist NFTs that I turned down out of principle. I mean, I just totally know I'd regret making an NFT 20 years down the road when they're viewed as stupid tulip mania. All of this is with crypto basically having next to no real-world applicability. Seriously, even Bitcoin has no real-world function as of now and no serious road to becoming a currency. One of the big problems in tech is that its bubble is entirely what are called early adopters, in that once a product starts, they're the people who will get the app since they like to get new apps or technologies just for the sake of it. Those are the people the San Francisco tech elite talks to. As an example, inserting robotic chips into the human body or Neuralink, which is supposed to read people's minds but emblematically just doesn't work, are considered the wave of the future in Silicon Valley, while the general population considers them disgusting abominations. This is why Google Glass was such a failure, since the tech community thinks, like, I want to make a technology since tech is inherently cool, while the general population thinks, why the hell would I ever use that? It makes me look like a total dweeb. A major factor here is that there's a profound disconnect between the tech community, which is always looking for ways to make tech more ubiquitous in society, and most people who are kind of sick and hate how much time they spend on social media or their screens, especially after COVID. Likewise, much of Silicon Valley considers human nature a problem to be fixed by artificial intelligence, Neuralink or robotic inserts, and the general population largely views this as an evil abomination. I talk about it a lot in this other video, but you can tell the economy is going to collapse when it reaches a degree of intuitive ridiculousness and general foolishness that means it can't support its own hype, and you see that everywhere in tech. On a regular basis, I see companies that raise millions of dollars with ideas that basically make no sense on how they'd actually raise money. On a cultural basis, which is normally indicative of broader realities, you have founder fashion, or people dressing like tech CEOs, which is supposedly fashionable, ignoring that tech CEOs are horribly dressed. I know plenty of tech companies that drop several $1,000s a night buying at bars before they make a single cent of actual profits. I mean, also, Prince Harry works at a tech startup and Obama is a tech VC. Industries that are this cool, for lack of a better term, cannot support their own hype in the real world and will collapse. There's a general pattern on how technologies are implemented and when they stop being implemented. What the pattern has been since the start of the Industrial Revolution, at least in America, which is a very technologically focused society, has been that technology is pioneered, often by the military before some breakthrough allows it to be cheap enough to manufacture for the general public. It starts with the wealthy as a luxury, but then percolates downwards until it becomes commonplace. People then try to push the innovation too far and society is harmed a little bit, while at the same time, its proponents argue that said innovation will totally remake civilization. The innovation then becomes boring to the general public and retreats to the background while being pushed back either by a return to a new technology or going back to whatever came before. This all occurs in, I'd say, a little bit over a generation. To use the car as an example, it started as a luxury to the wealthy and then with Henry Ford's breakthrough became ubiquitous. After World War II, America was in love with the car, doing all sorts of things that we now find kind of dumb, like drive-in theaters or restaurants. However, the car was pushed too far as is, much to the detriment of cities like Los Angeles or Houston that are sprawled, traffic-clogged wastelands. Now, lots of young people find cars kind of boring and prefer to live in walkable cities with good public transportation. I would say that the modern tech and software industry is now in a position to how the car was after World War II, and that it's so emotionally overhyped that it's actively damaging society, and people are regretting it. Just look at the massive mental health problems with Gen Z driven by social media, the political radicalism driven by internet echo chambers, the collapse in social communities, and the rise in obesity from a sedentary lifestyle. I think if given the choice, most people would spend less time online, but our society is entirely addicted, and these apps are designed to be addictive in of themselves, meaning that it's hard for individuals to pull away by themselves. I think there are 3 reasons Meta won't work. The first of which is that people already spend way too much time on screens and hate it. The second of which is that whenever a technology becomes invasive, people start to dislike it. We like iPhones with they're in our pockets. We didn't like Google Glass because it's too close to our eyes. Meta is too invasive to the human condition. And the third is that sexual selection is extremely important for societies, and girls tend to not like guys who do things that are overtly not related to the rest of human society, and Meta will probably not be seen as an attractive or cool thing to do by girls, and thus guys won't do it in order to get laid. You hear a lot of tech enthusiasts list the ways that modern tech could pull a massive revolution, but most of these schemes like AI, crypto, or Neuralink or others either are decades out from working effectively or have no clear direction to working at all. The modern tech, or more accurately software industry, is really banging its head against a wall, and that's evident in that Facebook went with the stupid idea of Meta for a new innovation to try. Another important lens to look at this is the Kondratiev waves, which are a theory developed by a 1920s Russian economist who found that you saw stable periods of economic growth driven by technological revolutions, followed by market overreach, which then resulted in recessions and periods of economic stagnation. Since the 1920s, this is mapped on very well, and with the data, having a recession based off big tech overreaching would make sense. How exactly would the process of this collapse in this massive industry take place? Here are a few of my humble guesses. The first of which is that I see no way Meta works. It's a massive white elephant that there's really no market need for and no one really asked for. I don't think this in of itself would collapse the tech industry, however. The collapse of Facebook might seem unimaginable, but if you look at the list of the biggest companies in the country from decade to decade, it normally changes pretty quickly, and rapid financial collapses are often the norm. The truth is that when this happens to, say, a real estate company such as Sears without the mythical status given to social media companies today, it largely gets forgotten, however. The main factor here isn't anything in the tech industry itself. However, once our current economic bubble implodes, it means that the money that funds the modern myth of techno-futurism and the foolish degrees of optimism just won't be there anymore. The amount of money in modern tech is largely driven off myth. Like, take for example how Elon Musk is the richest man in the world but produces not a lot of actual value to the world economy. In my opinion, his valuation is largely driven off his Twitter account and general basedness. This is all pretty similar to how the financial industry had near mythical properties before the Great Depression, but the Depression effectively wiped that industry out for half a century, since it had lost its mystique and became regulated. To be clear, I think that companies like Facebook will continue to exist for decades and will probably be very big companies, but I think their dominant role as the cutting edge of economy, culture, and technology will be over, replaced by some industry that's yet to develop. American society is already at such a horrible knife's point of tension that if a recession happens that radically lowers the standard of living for a bit, it will provoke more political polarization, chaos, and thus change. Big tech has a lot of haters, partially driven by the genuine harm it's caused society, and if the industry implodes, it will probably be regulated by the government. This honestly does make sense, since a lot of social media apps are addictive in ways that are unhealthy for society, but also, in all realism, I think the government will go too far. This process of humiliation and regulation will further weaken the big tech myth. At this point, tech will no longer be considered sexy. All industries end up being regulated in America at some point, especially new ones, and I think you could draw parallels to how finance was regulated after it blew up in the 1920s, while it was relatively new, or the railroads were regulated in 1900. I think a couple different factors lead big tech towards more government regulation in the future. The first of which is that the massive amount of social power they have in manipulating society, since young people and the population in general spend so much time on these websites. I mean, realistically, we're already seeing government interest in big tech and regulating it, and that's driven by a combination of genuine harm these companies have done, but also envy of these companies being so wealthy and powerful. At the same time, these are natural monopolies. So, for example, you can't divide up Facebook, but because Facebook's power is driven by its sheer size and network effects, but once that exists, you would have to have some degree of regulation, which is what the government does with telephone companies, for example, which also have natural monopolies. I mean, also, to go on an entirely different rant, which is its own 20-plus minute video, this all assumes the US government maintains its current administrative structure, which it really can't, because the US's current administrative structure sucks. And I think you realistically could see a government that is as or more regulated than it is now, or America go in an anti-regulation direction, but that's not something that I can really get into now. Another factor is that as the world gets more chaotic and divided, that some countries might not like having giant American companies feeding off and looking at their nation's inhabitants' data. And the European Union is the best example of this right now, which is creating various legislations against American big tech. But I could also see similar policies in other countries in the future, effectively banning American companies in many cases. Once Gen Z gets older, entire generations will have lived in a world with the information revolution, and it'll stop being interesting in the same way the car isn't today. If you're a tech person listening to this, I wouldn't freak out and form a craft brewery in Austin, Texas. There's still a lot of advances to be had and money to be made, but the age of glory is over, and instead we're going to fill out the lake, where you're going to see future advances like maybe automated homes, fan communities, or satellite-based Wi-Fi, but you're not going to have massive strides. Organizations, especially empires, tend to reach their geographically largest extent after they've stopped being in the cutting edge, whether with the year of the most horses in America being 1920, or the geographic high point of the Islamic world came nearly 1,000 years after it technologically lost out to the West. I expect that the next generation will see a large backlash to the excesses of social justice, and that will be combined with a backlash against technology. The two are similar in that they both push against our natural human natures and biologies, whether through saying gender doesn't exist and encouraging self-flagellation, or addicting us to screens and making us lonely due to interconnection. Thus, I expect the cultural anthem of the children of Gen Z to be based around being natural, whether being in touch with nature, our heritage, the human animal, etc. Social media and technology will be common, but we'll have developed social ways to deal with it. People who spend too much time online will be considered kind of weird, apps will be regulated by the government to give us less addictive dopamine hits, and parents will have tight controls on how much screen time their kids have. What a Feltist, and thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please like, comment, subscribe, or stay tuned for additional content. Or alternatively, check out my Pearl page or my Patreon, which has got the first couple hundred pages of my cultural history of America and history of the world. Or alternatively, check out my social media. As always, thanks so much for watching and have a wonderful day.